I'm Melissa, and welcome to Meldrum Makerspace, where we are creating the life we want by creating a home of faith, love, learning, and order. A couple weeks ago, I shared with you the story of my son Clayton, who was stillborn just about a year ago, last October in 2019. Today, I'm going to share with you the story of my daughter Rose, who was stillborn just over 6 years ago in September of 2014. Just like most birth stories, each of their stories is extremely different and unique to them. To start from the beginning, we had our first daughter, Zoe, who is now 12, back right as my husband graduated college. At that point, life was turning out exactly as we had planned. He graduated school, I had our first child, I quit working, and life was supposed to go on with just the ideal perfection, right? My happily ever after was happening. After we had Zoe, I ran into just some issues getting pregnant. It just kind of wasn't happening. I did see a specialist for a little while. We never quite had the money for super in-depth testing or doing some of the in vitro and even getting anywhere close to those sort of things. It wasn't happening. We knew that in order to go to a super high-end specialist and do all the testing and start down the path of possible in vitro and all of that sort of stuff, we knew that would cost some money, so it wasn't something we could do right away. So I did all the research I could, and we did all the things that I knew of to try to help the process, and I wasn't getting pregnant. So at one point, we had kind of given up that we would have any more children. I finally got rid of all the baby stuff after 4 years of holding on to it at least. Finally got rid of all of that stuff. I'd been working again, and we've been trying to pay off debt and just get in a place. After about 6 years of trying various things, we had pretty much given up hope that I was pregnant, that I would be able to get pregnant. So I, at that time, started having some tooth pains, and my wisdom teeth, which had never been dealt with when I was younger because they weren't a problem then, had started growing in here in the back, and they were starting to cause me some pain. So I finally scheduled an appointment with a dentist or an ortho surgeon or whatever, and I went in for an appointment and got evaluated. Everything went fine. I went in for the day where I was supposed to have my teeth extracted, and of course I was planning on being put under because nobody wants to be awake for that. And as I was filling out the intake paperwork, the very, very, very last question was, is there a chance you could be pregnant? And I read it, and normally I probably wouldn't have even thought and been like, nope, because of, the last 6 years, it had not happened. But for some reason I stopped and I thought about it, and I'm like, well, I don't think I am, but I can't know for sure that I'm not unless, I'm either on my cycle or am pregnant, right? And so I kind of went up. I should have just checked no, right? Thinking back, that would have been the easier route, right? But instead I went up to the nurse and I explained to her that kind of my story, and that no, I highly, highly, highly doubted I was pregnant. It had been many, many months since my last cycle, and but I didn't know for sure. And so they went back and they talked with the doctor, and anyways, the consensus came back that unless I knew 100% that I was not pregnant, I had to go home and take a test and reschedule. That sucked. I remember Clay had taken the day off work so that I didn't have to drive myself home afterwards, obviously. So we're driving home, and I'm just crying and bawling and been like, this is just another slap in my face, showing, that my body can't get pregnant, and that I'm failing, in life, and that it felt like being slapped in the face because I couldn't get pregnant, but then I couldn't get my teeth pulled because I had to go take another stupid test, and I'd taken hundreds of them, right? And they'd all come back negative, and I just did not want to go through that again then. So I just bawled the whole way home, right? Just so mad at life and upset and frustrated and sad and annoyed and all of those feelings. So on the way home, I'm sure we stopped at the Dollar Tree, and I picked up a pregnancy test, and we went home, and then my husband went to work. Zoe, I don't know if she was in school or daycare at the time. She would have been in school. She would have been in kindergarten, so she was at school. So my husband goes to work, I'm home alone. I'm like, well, I might as well get this over with now, right? And so I went and I took that test. And guess what? I was pregnant. It was the biggest shocker ever. Like, up to that point in my life, it was the biggest shock. So it was pretty cool though, right? So of course, now I get all excited. I'm like, wait, what? I'm pregnant? Like, this is not what we thought was happening and was, possible even at this point. So, of course, we ended up telling everybody, and we were all excited, and we just thought, great, we're finally expanding our family. At that point, Zoe was like 6 years old, so it'd been 6 years since our first, and we were excited. I do remember sitting down that day in my kitchen and opening my laptop and starting a new journal entry, and maybe I'll pull it and put it in here, but it said something to the essence of, I'm pregnant and I'm super excited, but something's different with this pregnancy. I didn't know what. I didn't have at that point, I had no clue the path we were headed down. I had no idea, no inkling. I just knew that something was different and special about this pregnancy. I also had an extremely profound experience for myself of Heavenly Father telling me that He loved me and that this pregnancy was a blessing for keeping some commandments that we had struggled with prior, specifically paying our tithing. That wasn't something in our marriage we had been very consistent about and very good about. That's something we had changed, the year prior, and we had been really diligent at paying our tithing. And I knew pretty much as soon as I found out I was pregnant that was a direct blessing to having followed that law and that commandment. So there was no denying that Heavenly Father had a plan in me getting pregnant. There was, from the moment I found out, it was just His hand was in the whole thing, and I couldn't not see it. It was so there. So life goes on, super happy, super exciting. We're telling everyone. I found my midwife. I was going to go use the same midwife that I had used with Zoe. And so we started all that process. Things were going great. All my appointments were going great. Everything just was great. So about 20 weeks is usually when you do kind of the full anatomy scan, ultrasound wise. And being with a midwife, we still decided to do that because it just felt like a good time to just kind of check, right? Use the technology that the world has nowadays. It absolutely has its benefits. And also we wanted to find out if we were having a boy or a girl. So we did the anatomy scan with the gender scan, and we did it on our way down to Houston. So it was a Friday. We went and we did the scan in the morning, and then we were driving down to Houston. So this was probably June of 2014, I believe. June, maybe, well, probably July, actually. And I remember it being quiet, that the technician was kind of very quiet while he was doing the scan. I do remember he said some things at the end about some things that he saw that he was concerned about, but he had to send the ultrasound over to the actual doctor that can reads the scans before he could really tell me anything. But the things that he did mention was extra fluid, and he mentioned specifically around the base of the neck, right? So for any of you who are genetic specialists like my sister-in-law, you would automatically start picking out 100 different things that could be. So the whole drive down to Houston, I started Googling all the hundreds of things that could be wrong with our baby, right? Again, at this point, I just figured, okay, I'm going to have a baby with special needs, maybe a NICU stay, maybe some surgeries, who knows, right? Life is going to change for sure. But that we were still excited. We found out that weekend down in Houston, my sister, we gave her the envelope, and she went and put together a whole little gender reveal for us, and we found out we were having a little girl, and we were so super excited. So it was a great weekend. We tried not to worry about what might be happening. We just enjoyed our time. Anyway, so we get home, and that Monday morning, my midwife calls, and She tells me that there was some things concerning on the scan and that I needed to get in to see a specialist immediately, like that day. And so she said she'd been making some calls and she was gonna kind of see what they could do, like how fast they could get me in and get me in with someone. Of course, at this point, we're like, okay, something's going on. And we couldn't get in that immediate day to see anyone, which actually turns out to be fine. Clay's sister, at that time, well, had just kind of stopped being, but for years had been a prenatal genetic counselor. So she had actually worked with many high-risk specialist OBs, perinatologists in the Dallas area. So of course we called her up and we said, hey, this is what's going on. This is what we know. Who do we go see? Who would you recommend? And so she went kind of through her list and she made a recommendation to go see Dr. Weiss in Dallas, which is where we live. And so we set up an appointment and I think we saw him like the next day. I don't know if it was Tuesday or Wednesday. Anyways, I know by Wednesday we knew what was going on. So Candace came over before we even went in to see the doctor. And at that point we'd had what the diagnosis was, which really is a symptom, not a diagnosis of what the problem was. But it looked like our daughter had something called fetal hydrops, which is when fluid builds up inside two or more cavities inside the body. So we didn't know the extent of it. We looked up what it could be. For some babies, it's a swelling of the abdomen or a swelling of certain extremities, and it kind of can go away. Most babies, you know, it causes stillbirth. So we knew. So Candace came over, explained everything, went through all the like genetics of it, and it was, you know, very informative. And then she went with us to our appointment the next day with Dr. Weiss because she knew him. So it was kind of fun. So let's see. So with our appointment with Dr. Weiss, we found out pretty quickly that it was pretty severe. She didn't just have a mild, basic, easy case of fetal hydrops. She had an extremely severe case. There almost was not a part of her body that was not filled with fluid, from her head down to her toes. Everything. Nothing. Her body literally could not grow anymore. So one of the things that it causes is because there's fluid in the lung cavity and around the heart, her lungs can't grow. It can cause stress around the heart and cause the heart to stop. Her brain wasn't growing because there was so much fluid in there. There was no space for the organs to grow and all those sorts of things. So it was pretty intense, just kind of finding out that she's really sick. And it wasn't going to be just a, you know, oh, she'll probably get better and, you know, might be some troubles at first case. So we did opt to do an amniocentesis that day, mostly because we wanted to find out what the cause of the fetal hydrops was. With fetal hydrops, there's generally some underlying cause thing that is causing the symptoms. So fetal hydrops is actually a symptom, not the of something else. So most times fetal hydrops is caused because of some sort of virus, almost just like a cold virus. There's 5 or 6 or 7 main ones that can cause it, and it could literally be something I picked up on the street, you know, from my family, from friends, from church, who knows where, right? And I might not have even really felt the symptoms, but if it, you know, had the virus just gotten in my bloodstream, it could have affected the baby. So it could have been one of those. So we ran for those tests. It could be a genetic like abnormality, so that's why we did the amnio, so we could run a genetic test, and they did some crazy sequencing test to see if it was something there. Both of those came back negative. The other thing is it could be some sort of like birth defect, like a hole in the heart or some other various things. He did he looked at everything he could, and he could not see any physical defects that would have caused the hydrops. So we ruled that out. And then the other thing is just like straight up fluke, right? Just, we don't know why. And that's the category we fall in, because that's how I am with life, right? If it can happen, let's have it happen, right? Who knows why? So at that appointment, of course, the doctor suggested that we terminate the pregnancy. He said there was no chance of her survival. She would be born stillborn, And one of the complications of fetal high drops is the further you go in the pregnancy, the more risk it puts on the mom. There's something called mirror syndrome, where I could have started basically developing fetal high drops in myself and having extra swelling and fluid retention in my body. And so that was something we had to monitor closely, because that could have ended up killing me if it got severe enough. So knowing that that was a possibility, but also knowing that we weren't going to terminate the pregnancy, we just knew how to move forward in watching me and, you know, seeing what was going to happen with our daughter. So this was, I guess, sometime in July that this happened, that we found all this out. So we knew that at some point in the near future, within the next couple months, we would most likely be giving birth to a stillborn daughter. Or if she was born alive, it would be very short, a very minutes, if that, life. So we prepared ourselves as much as you can, right? I read books, I got on blogs, I reached out to a whole bunch of Facebook groups of mothers who have dealt with this, and we just tried to prepare ourselves the best we could, right? Of course, we told family and friends and kind of let the whole world know our journey at the time. One of the funny things that I laugh about is I remember kind of coming to terms with the fact that I would not be bringing my daughter home, right? It's kind of hard to think about that, like, you could come to terms with that even before I'd given birth. But I'd been to the temple multiple times, and I'd had some amazing experiences, and I knew that everything would be okay. But I also wanted to be in control, right? So I remember sitting down one week with my boss at work. So at the time I was working, and he knew everything that was going on. And we sat down with my calendar because there were some things coming up, and that week we had some meetings, and I had put on the calendar like when my next appointment was and stuff like that. Anyways, and I remember sitting there talking to him and being like, well, I have this and this and this coming up. Also at the time I was the primary president in my ward. So I was over the children's organization of all the kids 18 months to 11 years old, and their Sunday classes and scouts and activity days and baptisms and just all of that stuff. And I was the president of that organization with over 100 children and adults running the program that I was running and managing, right? And I had great counselors, though one of them moved. So I really only had one counselor at the time. So she picked up a lot of slack. So anyway, so I remember we were looking over the calendar, and I knew I had an appointment that week. And I said, well, if I look at my calendar, this would be a really good week for me to go in and deliver her and, you know, deal with it and then be done, right? So I literally put on my calendar when would be a good time to go give birth to my stillborn daughter, because I had these things going on here and these things going on here, and I need to just do it here and be done, right? Of course, that was just not going to happen. So that week, so like a day later, I went to my appointment, and her heart had stopped. So she was dead. And obviously we knew it could happen. I didn't really expect it that day, because I just told my boss I didn't plan on it that week, right? But one of the things that has been so amazing through her whole journey is every night before some big piece or change, like even the day before we went into the ultrasound at 21 weeks, where we found out that something was going on, before we found out her gender, I have this thought, something might be wrong. Okay, no big thought, no big deal. It's whatever, right? And then this night before we went in, I had the thought, you know, she's passed, you're gonna find out tomorrow, right? And this could have just been my own brain, right? That's what I kind of attributed it to. But as I look back, to me, those were touch points of my Heavenly Father leading me and guiding me through that journey so that I was never alone. So, so I knew, but didn't know, right? And we went in and we found out that she had passed away. So she'd passed away sometime in the 2 weeks between the last appointment and that appointment. So we really didn't know how long she had been gone. One of the weird things with, not weird, but one of the things with her pregnancy was because she was so sick, even every ultrasound, she didn't move. She just like was there. There was no movement. I felt her like kick and move twice. Once kind of early on when you were supposed to, like about 18 weeks or so before anything was going, it was like one flutter that I knew it was her. And then the week she passed, there was one night just earlier in that week where I felt movement. It literally felt like she flipped around or something like that, which is interesting because at the appointment before she was breech, and then the appointment where they found out she'd passed away, she was head down. And so she had moved, and I knew I had felt it that day, which for me was another tender mercy of my Heavenly Father to let me know that she was alive and she was there, and that, you know, she wasn't just a mass of cells, right? So, okay, so back to the appointment. We went in, we found out she'd passed away. We, at that point, knew that we needed to kind of go back to the hospital and deliver her. So they said there's a chance she could pass on her own, but they at that point expected she'd probably been gone for a couple days, if not a week. And they didn't want it to go too long because if she wasn't born, then she could cause sepsis and cause problems for me if she was, you know, decomposing inside me for too long. So that was a Wednesday. I think it was a Wednesday. Might have been a Thursday. That we had that appointment. I should know, right? You think you remember these dates, but things always blur. What I do remember is after we got that news, laughing in the elevator with my husband, and my mom and my sister-in-law were there. I remember cracking a few jokes, and the nurses being like, is she okay? She's like cracking jokes, and we just told her baby's dead. And my mom and them were like, no, that's how she handles it. That's how she reacts. So, anyway, so we got home. We, of course, kind of told people. We didn't know what everything the next step would be. We spent the next day at least going to funeral homes and finding a place to bury our daughter. So we checked out. I have a sister-in-law who had a daughter who was born and only lived a couple hours. Well, gosh, at this point it's been 15 years ago, 16 years ago, something like that. And she's buried here in the Dallas area. So we went to that funeral home to look at that possibility. We went to a couple others just to kind of see. If you don't know, it's really expensive to bury someone, and babies at most places are not any cheaper. During this whole process, we had talked with my grandma, and she lives up in a super small town up in Panguitch in Utah, southern Utah, called Panguitch, and they have a family plot there at the cemetery there in Panguitch. And so after a bunch of talking and after a bunch of checking out various funeral homes, we decided that we wanted to bury Rose. And that's what we named her. We named her Rose, and I'll do another story about where we got their names and the significance of them. So we decided to bury Rose up in Utah at the family plot. So instead of costing us almost $10,000, which it would have had we buried her here in the Dallas area anywhere, we found a funeral home that for infants, they do most of the work for super, super discounted price. It was like $200 or $300, and that included picking up the body, embalming the body, preparing it for burial, doing all the paperwork. They did, we ended up getting to do an open house there with video, and they made us like a memory book and just all this beautiful experience. And then the casket we were able to get through them like at cost. So that only cost us like $200. So all in all, it was like $500 for all of the stuff we needed here in Texas. And then we would be able to have we had all the paperwork to transport her body to take her to Utah, where we had to like pay a guy like $100 at the cemetery to dig up a spot for her and then bury it for us. And that was like really the extent of the cost, which if you've ever had to plan a funeral, especially for a baby, you understand that's an amazing, amazing deal and an amazing part of the journey. For me, it's another moment where it shows me that Heavenly Father had a hand in my journey and in knowing what I needed, so that I could have that experience. So anyway, so we kind of arranged all that with the funeral home as much as possible beforehand, and then Friday night we invited my family out to dinner, and we went out and had some good Mexican food. And the next morning, Saturday, we went to the hospital. We had been told that it could be a process, that they would start me on, well, the night before I took some pills, and they'd start me on some different drugs and stuff when I got there. They said it might be a couple hours. They said if it's, you know, kind of a tricky one, if she's not quite ready to come, you know, or whatever, if your body doesn't want to go into labor, which happens sometimes with early losses, then it might be 24 hours or so, you know, until everything was done. We're like, okay, we can do this. So we went in Saturday expecting to be home by Sunday. Well, to, you know, save you 8 days of your life, we went in that Saturday and we didn't go home until the next Saturday. So they tried every single medication and technique that they had at their disposal to try and get me to go into labor. I was on Pitocin so high at one point that I talked to another doctor at one point and told him the number that I'd seen up there, and they said that literally could have ruptured my uterus. It was so high. At one point when they were doing that, I wasn't feeling any contractions or anything with the Pitocin, as high as it was even. But the nurse came in, I'm like, it just feels hard, and she like touched it, and big eyes, like, oh my gosh, your uterus is not supposed to feel like a rock right now. Turned it way down, right? We tried this one medication. Towards the end, we tried this medication that's like kind of a last resort type thing. And usually they give people 1, maybe 2 doses. I did 3, if not 4 doses of this. And it's so strong that they have to give you other medication before they even give you the medication to counter some of the side effects that will happen when you take this medication, you know, just so you could take it. So I'm like, great, this is gonna be fun. So I took that medication and still nothing. So Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Monday was Labor Day. We're like, hey, we should have this baby on Labor Day, right? And Tuesday, yeah, because she was born Wednesday. All those days, we sat there waiting, and nothing was happening. I never dilated past a 1. I had one night where I felt some kind of crampy contractions, which I loved. The nurse explained when they started this one medication that it feel like a bunch of horses were running up a mountain, you know, trying to get ready for battle, and they're all kind of running to get to the place to do it, and then they start running, you know, together. And it was definitely that kind of, you know, unorganized gathering feeling of contraction. So it was really interesting. But nothing was happening. And so finally, they said, well, the next step really is a C-section. There isn't much more we can do. Looking back, I probably could have made some different choices and maybe had done things in a more natural way or tried some other things that I know now. But at the time, I went with what I knew. So, and I don't regret any of the choices that I made at that time. The journey that I went on, I fully believe was, you know, I learned things that I wouldn't have learned any other way. So we decided finally to just have a C-section. I was done. I was done being pregnant. I was done carrying around my dead baby and knowing that she was already gone and not being able to hold her and being stuck and not able to move on, and just, I was done. I was done. I remember at one point I was talking, the whole time we were there, my husband was there and my in-laws were there and my mom was there. My dad was actually out of the country for work when all this happened, so I talked with him on the phone a few times. But I remember at one point being like, okay, Heavenly Father, I've learned what I need to out of this situation, being here for so many days. So whatever somebody else is supposed to learn, help them learn it, because I'm done. I'm ready to move on. And so it was just some fun conversations and some good learning experiences. So we had the C-section the next day on September 3rd, 2014, about 2:30 in the afternoon. And if you've never had a C-section, I've now had two, and it's not something I would recommend if you can avoid it. For me, it was a little bittersweet because I had planned on doing a home birth that time. I had really wanted to go as natural as possible. I had really wanted to be at home in my own space, and to then have this experience where I ended up having an amniocentesis, and sorry, we love children. So anyways, so it just wasn't the birth experience I had planned. So actually, will you close the door for me, buddy? I can hear the AC.
AC?
Yeah, close the door.
What AC?
The air conditioning. Okay, sorry. We love interruptions and we love our children. So so really this wasn't the birth experience that I had been planning and expecting and hoping for. I had really hoped for a home birth, a very natural birth. This obviously that wasn't happening. I'd seen a specialist and had more ultrasounds than I ever had planned. I had the amniocentesis, which I never had planned. I'd had all those days in the hospital with all those medications that I didn't have planned. And now at the end of all of this, I was having to have a C-section, which was like the last thing I ever wanted in my life ever, right? And that was kind of what was ending this journey. So we had the C-section, and we knew it was kind of what time it would be happening, and so we'd called both sides of our families and let them know, because we wanted as many people to be involved and to celebrate her life as possible. So my sister had Zoe, and so she brought Zoe up to the hospital so that Zoe could meet her little sister, so that we could be surrounded by family and just, you know, have as wonderful as an experience as possible. So after the C-section, we kind of went, instead of going to recovery room, we got to go back to my private room where I'd been for I don't know how many days at that point, and a whole bunch of our family showed up, and it was just wonderful to just kind of be surrounded by everybody. I was, of course, completely out of it, completely loopy. At one point I was having kind of an allergic reaction, I guess, to some of the stuff, and I was just itchy. And no one in my family is big on doctors and shots and hospitals and things like that. And I, so much so, but at that point I'd had IVs and shots and epidural and a C-section, and I was so out of it that I didn't even care. And the nurse came in with some medication to help with the itchiness or whatever, and she's like, okay, this, you know, on the back of your arm or whatever, and like both of my brothers almost completely passed out, right? You could just see them like go white and turn around, so they didn't have to see me just get a little shot in my arm. And so it was just, you know, super funny. So I had an amazing nurse through all this. We'd had lots of nurses, but kind of the nurse we had the first day and the nurse we had when she was born happened to be the same nurse, and so it was, again, a beautiful ending and bookends to the experience at the hospital. She was very gentle. My mom and Clay and my mother-in-law, they all got to help bathe her and dress her, and everyone who wanted to got to hold her. We have a friend of ours who volunteers for Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep, which is an organization that does photos for babies who are stillborn or miscarried, or babies in the NICU who are passing away, all of those sort of things. They do beautiful photography, and she herself is just like an extremely talented photographer. So she came to the hospital and took pictures for us that I will cherish forever. And we had cake, because Zoe was like, well, it's her birthday, we gotta have cakes. We had this cute little cake with cupcakes, and it was just, all in all, a really, really beautiful afternoon, surrounded by family. And for me, I loved that because, like with Clayton, nobody else saw him. Nobody else got to hold him. It was so quick and so over that nobody else got to be part of the journey. And with Rose, everybody was involved. Everybody had a place. Everyone was welcome. And everybody has a memory and a moment that they got to spend with her and throughout all that. So it was just, I'm very grateful for kind of the way it all came together. Let's see. So, because I'd had a C-section, I had to stay in the hospital for a couple days. I actually got to the next day, hold her again, which I know in some ways can sound totally creepy and weird, right? Like, why in the world would I want to hold a dead, cold baby, you know, the next day? But just having those moments, because you don't get them back. It's not like I get another chance. It's not like I could be like, oh, I don't want to hold her today, I'll hold her next week or whatever. Like, this was my only time with her physical body to just mourn the loss of that. And so I did. I took any moment that I could, because I knew they would just be gone. We ended up leaving the hospital on that Saturday and going home, and then, you know, life was still going on for everybody else, and I had to work through my journey of being home with the loss. And I'll talk more about that, some of those different parts later this month, but I was 100% surrounded by family and friends and love and kindness and gifts and food and prayers, and just I could really see how something so kind of terrible and horrible can really bring people together and build connections and build unity and build love and understanding and compassion and all of these things that were shown and were given and were felt, and hearing about other women that I'd known for years and their stories of loss, and knowing that I wasn't alone. And it was pretty amazing, actually. So anyways, so we did, 2 weeks later, as soon as I was cleared to be able to drive, we drove up to Utah and buried her up there. And I'll share more about that later. But that's kind of my story of Rose, and finding out I was pregnant and finding out she was sick and then giving birth. So anyways, I know that story was a little bit longer than my last one, because it was a much more robust story than with Clayton, but I hope that maybe you were able to, I don't know, find some hope, maybe see Heavenly Father's love. I never once questioned him or wondered, okay, I'm sure I said, why me, right? But I also was like, why not me? You know, I saw the blessings and I threw out the storm, even though it was definitely a storm was raging around me. I found peace, I found love, I found strength, I found hope, and I found one of the greatest blessings of my entire life in my daughter Rose and in my experience there. Anyways, hope y'all have a great day. Bye.